It has been almost a week since the Israeli elections when Benjamin Netanyahu stunned many by leading a conservative coalition's return to power. Now, what will this new government look like? How conservative will it be? And what are the issues driving Israeli voters to make such a change? Here with me now to discuss this and more is Chris Mitchell, Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN News, who is coming to us from Jerusalem. Chris, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Tony, great to be with you again.
All right, so what's it look like there on the ground? It looks like, from what we're seeing here, that this is a strong push to the right by Israelis.
Very much so, Tony. In fact, some might argue that this is the most conservative or right-wing government in Israel's history. It consists of four parties: the Likud, which is also a right-wing or conservative party, and three religious parties: religious Zionism, Shas, and Israel Judaism, Torah. Those are the three religious parties, and they're already in coalition negotiations with Benjamin Netanyahu. On Wednesday, Israel's president, Yitzhak Herzog, will sit down with all the parties, and it's really just expected that he's going to give the nod to Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud to go ahead and form a government. Now, they have 28 days to do that, but since they're all unified right now, it looks like within days, maybe a week or two, they can have a coalition government. And as you said, it's very conservative. And really, I think two of the issues that were key during the election, Tony, were one, security. Under the former government, there was a real spike in terror attacks throughout Judea and Samaria and here in Israel proper. That was one thing. There was a sense that Israelis just were unsafe. They felt unsafe. So that was one of the main themes. The other one was the sense of national identity. I think Israelis, many of them were feeling they were losing their own identity because of some of the progressive policies of the former government. And in fact, the one analyst put it to me, it was almost like having the European Union on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea and losing the national identity of a Jewish state.
Very interesting, Chris, because that sounds like some parallels to the United States when we look at the issue of crime in particular. Only about a third of Americans say they feel as safe as they did 4 years ago. And so there's some parallels, I think. How many seats right now does it look like this coalition has?
The coalition has 64 seats right now, and that's out of a 120-seat parliament. It's a pretty solid majority. Right now, it seems like it's a really tight-knit coalition, so they're going to have a stable government, which is another thing that Israelis had been looking for. They had 5 elections within 4 years, and that was one of the things that Israelis were looking for, somehow getting a stable government. On the right or conservative, they were many people that they increased their vote totals. But there was, I think that was one of the main themes. A lot of people didn't want to go back to the polls again. But the 64 seats, since they are so tight-knit, I think could have a solid majority. And maybe, it hasn't happened since 1988, Tony, but they be able to serve out their 4-year term in the Knesset.
Wow. Wow. I know for some that don't track Israeli politics as close, having 64 seats out of 120 doesn't sound like much. But what we've seen in the last several years is just like a 1 or maybe 2-seat majority, which could easily flip and cause the entire government to collapse and have to send the voters back to the polls.
Exactly. And on the left, you have probably 45 seats or so on some of the left or left-center groups. And they would need the Arab parties to go ahead and get a majority or over the 61 seats that they need. That was used in the former government. They had a party called Ra'am. It was affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. That was also, I think, part of the reaction when Israelis voted about this vote. They didn't want necessarily a group in the parliament that actually advocated, not to have a Jewish state to some degree. And so that makes it very hard and difficult for the left to go ahead and get over that 61-seat majority without the help of some of these Arab parties.
So Chris Mitchell, would you say then that kind of Jewish nationalism was an undercurrent here, a theme that drove many of the voters to embrace this what has now become a very strong, as you said, maybe historic right-wing government?
I would say so. I mean, I haven't heard that term until you mentioned it, but Jewish nationalism, I think it was a very strong theme. Some of the Israelis that I talked to, that's exactly how they kind of was saying it without necessarily using those words. This sense that their identity wasn't necessarily based on the Bible, on their history, but based on sort of a more progressive sense, and as I referred to earlier, more like a European enclave here on the eastern part of the Mediterranean. So definitely, this Jewish identity played a strong part in this past election.
So overall, we're seeing the Israeli voters respond to the progressive policies of a more left-leaning government there in Israel, and it looks like the pendulum have swung back in a very decisive and distinct way.
Definitely, and I think one of the things, Tony, that played in this, and you may remember there was a recent maritime deal between Israel and Lebanon, where many people felt that Israel gave up its sovereignty over some of the territorial waters off of the northern coast of Israel, and pressured by some believe by the U.S. administration that they would really go ahead and give that sovereign territory in sort of to appease what's going on inside Lebanon, which is actually controlled by the Iranian terror proxy Hezbollah. And I think that was another thing that some people may have reacted to, was the fact that the former government led by Yair Lapid was going much in the direction that the U.S. administration, the Biden administration, wanted to. For example, he was there at the UN and he talked about a two-state solution, something that hadn't been mentioned by any prime minister in years. And so it
Right.
seemed like the current government will take a much different view towards a two-state solution, towards the Abraham Accords, to Saudi-U.S. relations, and a host of things.
Chris, we're out of time, but I want to reconnect in the not too distant future, because I think what we'll see in a Netanyahu administration is that once again we'll see them reaching out to build relations with evangelicals like they did under the Obama administration. So we'll talk more about that in the future. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tony.